Okay, good afternoon. So hopefully the class size is stabilizing now. I know many of you have met me for project idea. So let's see, where do we stand? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 13, 17, 18 or so. Okay, so that's where I was hoping to get to. So I know many of you have met me already about projects, and I've given project ideas. Some of you are looking for project partners. Hopefully that has happened over Piazza. Some of you haven't met me. I think you need to meet me. So please do so. One thing about this week is the following. I have to go to UC Irvine on Friday to give a talk there. So I'm going to shift my office hours from Friday to Thursday. Let's see. Yeah, so Thursday right after the class we'll do my office hours. So and I know one group has set up time to meet me today right after the class. So please do come and meet me, because what's happening is that during those come with your team ideally, because during that back and forth is where the project ideas are getting finalized. I think every group which has met me, by the time we were done, there was a concrete project sort of decided. So it's good to come and talk with me. Okay. Before I move on, any questions? Okay, no one. So towards the end of last lecture, we were basically talking about this whole issue that let me go back a few slides, that we are often faced with this situation where we are sort of sensors owned by us are collecting data about us, and then it kind of goes through this pipeline of the data is collected by a platform. Usually we trust the platform, because if you don't trust the platform, then really there's not much you can do. So that would be your vendor of the hardware and the maker of the operating system on that device, right? But after that, there is a whole series of other players which come into play. So third-party apps that you install, or third-party services that the apps linked to or send the data to. And I was walking through kind of the different strategies that come up out there. So one strategy really is share answers, don't share the raw data. And just it's kind of a special case of a broader principle in security, which is called principle of least privilege, which is you should not give any party more privilege to a resource than what they need to do that task, because otherwise you're always introducing additional risks. In this context, what it concretely translates to is that if someone, let's say an app needs a number of steps or some such thing, then you should, the platform, the trusted part of the platform, should compute it and send it out. And in recent years, to some extent, that has begun to happen in any case for reasons of power efficiency. So for example, over the past 4 or 5 years, our phones now have chips which compute things like transportation modality, are you standing or are you driving, or stuff like that, or number of steps taken, these kind of things. There are kind of some chips, usually they're called sensor hub, or I think Apple calls them M1, M2 kind of chips. They are oftentimes simply specialized microcontrollers with some firmware. Sometimes they are ASICs, kind of hardware units which are designed, but kind of the idea is they are kind of computing the answers, and that's what gets exposed. So essentially there's a distillation of information which is happening. Now this doesn't get you scot-free, because oftentimes, as I also previously alluded, even the answers to one question reveal answers about other things. So less accurately, but that can. But concretely, technologically, what it means is that we need to basically have machine learning algorithms, both training and inferencing, happening at the edge devices. And there is a lot of activity, startup activity, and all around this, around sort of hardware support and all for this. The second strategy is that when you share the data, you share the data after selectively obfuscating it. And obfuscation is a very broad term, refers to methods like censoring it. So we kind of just chop the thing in a time stream, adding noise, replacing it with synthetic data, or even more extreme could be replace the entire data set by a synthetic data set. So you could imagine that instead of sharing the time series that my sensors were collecting, I instead train a machine learning algorithm which can generate a entirely synthetic time series which maintains the essential properties but is synthetic. And I'm sure all of you or most of you would have heard GANs, generative adversarial networks, which is a way of training neural nets, particularly for tasks which are generative, as where the idea is you're synthesizing image or acoustic signal or some sensor data. So there is a fair bit of interest in these kind of synthetic techniques, and they have gotten pretty good. Deep fakes and all are examples of that. So you might imagine something similar happening for reasons of privacy. So you train. So one approach, and this could be, I have some sensor my own data, or you can even imagine in a population context, I have data from a large number of users, and then what in which case we are generating for the population. But let's say it's my own data, so I have collected a lot of data, but now some, let's say, medical study wants to get access to it. So what I can do is I can train a GAN on my data, and then it will generate data which kind of mimics the statistics of my data but doesn't actually correspond to any given particular trace. And then I publish that GAN, okay, and you can imagine the same thing for a population scale. It still doesn't get you totally free. I mean, in this case, I'm training over a data set, training a model, and then publishing a generative model. What problem do you see with this? So I'm no longer sharing the data set. I'm training a model over that data set, and I'm publishing the model. Do you see a privacy problem? Right. So model is trained on the. So remember last time I referred to that how models could be used to make inferences about what was in the training data. So that becomes a challenge out here. So then you have to resort to techniques where the model training happens in a privacy preserving manner. And very, very loosely, you could imagine that when we are training the model, whenever it makes use of training data, we add noise to that process. And we add noise to that process using this differential privacy that I had mentioned, which last time, which we'll cover later in the course, but it's a theoretically sound way of adding noise of a particular type so that you can make guarantees that it will not leak. Okay, so there are principled ways of going around doing this obfuscation, and there are unprincipled way. Example of unprincipled way, as I had cited last time, was let's just add noise, adding Gaussian noise, for example. These things are easily cancelable. So this obfuscation has to be done kind of carefully, but it's a very popular technique because it gives a degree of comfort. I'm going to not reveal the truth. I'm just going to lie a little bit or lie somewhat, but you have to lie in a manner that it cannot be inverted. That's kind of the thing out here. In some settings, obfuscation itself can be a giveaway, and I had cited that example. If I do things in a manner where every time I was doing something sensitive, I suppress my time series, and at some stage you get to know that I'm suppressing whenever I'm doing, whenever it was sensitive activity, you will get suspicious. In general, in security, one of the things, one of the very desirable things is you have to assume that the adversary knows your algorithm. Okay, you may have heard this term security by obscurity. Generally, that's a bad idea, because those secrets cannot remain secret. So if you think that you are using some unknown algorithm or obscure algorithm, but sooner or later it will be figured out. And we are seeing that debate playing out this week. I mean, I'm sure you sort of heard about Attorney General Barr's request or whatever lawsuit against Apple now about being able to break into the 2 iPhones out of that naval-based attack. So essentially, the thing is there such a thing as that I can obscure for everyone else, but not in this case for the government. That's the debate which is playing out. But back out here, the challenge is that there are plenty of ad hoc approaches for doing this obfuscation there, okay? Stripping obvious things from the data, adding random noise, stuff like that, selectively suppressing, things like that. But almost everything that has been proposed, other than differential privacy, has been inverted. And the challenge is that when you do these things, we kind of often make a naive assumption that the adversary is only looking at this data, and that's never the case. They have access to all sort of other contextual data, background information, open source information. If you think that your apps only have access to those sensor data, you are kind of deluding yourself, right? I mean, there is a whole bunch of sort of digital crumbs about ourselves which these apps have access to. Okay. One way to sort of formulate this problem is often in terms of a privacy utility trade-off. So privacy is never in the absolute. If you care about privacy, then you'll never share anything. Okay, so privacy is always relative to some other goals. Oftentimes utilitarian goals, and oftentimes very desirable goal. Like for example, you may have heard a lot of concerns about AI algorithms being unfair, right? They make use of traits that we would not normally consider to be acceptable, like race or gender or age or things like that. The problem though is that many of these traits may also be private. So the thing is, can an algorithm be fair in terms of, let's say, race if it doesn't know your race? Okay, now you could say, okay, I'll remove race from the data. Sounds easy. Of course, you cannot. Let's look at university admissions, right? We get these files. Okay, we don't ask. Let's say we were to not ask for race. I think UCLA does ask for it. Do you think we cannot figure out the race of the applicant? I mean, all the statement of purpose, stuff like that, right? Even the names, right? I mean, are a giveaway. So it's very challenging to sort of do these things, and oftentimes sort of you have, in order to be fair, perhaps you need to know. Going out here, what is basically the problem, our problem boils down to the following, that we want these apps to be able to make some instances which you can think of a whitelist. This is what is providing us the utility, but then there are other inferences we do not want them to be able to make. So like for example, not be able to know, let's say take admission context, I want them to be able to judge some notion of whatever, would this applicant succeed in grad school or not, but not be able to infer things disallowed. Now the problem is that these two inferences are oftentimes correlated, right? I mean, a whitelisted inference and a blacklisted inference is kind of a trade-off. You can't say I know one and know nothing about the other. Life just isn't like that. But that's in a sense the problem that we are trying to solve, and I think most of the attempts towards this thing are kind of in some shape and form approximations to that idealization. To give you an example, this is some work out of University of Memphis, but I was engaged in it in a collaboration role. So what these guys were solving is the following problem. They conduct medical studies, they collect data from a lot of individuals, and then they want to and they strip away names and such, so kind of the obvious identifiers, and then they publish the data set for other researchers to use to create models, figure out how can we predict diseases or onset of disease or recurrence of disease and stuff like that. So typically these are from wristband sensors and chest bells and kind of all sort of wearable sensors of different form. So what this MCEIV system sought to do was basically had this notion of whitelist and blacklist. So the idea is that we are publishing time series. In this particular case, we want to publish time series because often what happens is that the other parties are the software there is designed to only accept raw data. What I mean by that is answers are not acceptable. They want something which looks like an ECG time series or some other sensors time series. Okay, so that's the format of the data or the data type in which we are after. So we have a set of whitelisted things, like in this particular case, certain activities of daily living that we were after, but then there are certain other activities which we were not, which users would typically consider sort of privacy invading, and so we want to hide that. So what this MC system very crudely did was, it basically did this data sanitization, and it did it using that differential privacy kind of paradigm. So the idea is that we are still releasing something which looks like raw data. It's sanitized so as to make make this data indistinguishable with respect to the blacklist. So the idea is that whatever data that we are releasing, and basically no more information about the blacklisted instances are revealed than would have been revealed than if I had not shared. So it's a very specific notion of privacy. Let's say I come to you and say, would you share data with me? I'm conducting a study. Now, there's already public information about you, like let's say about me. I'm Indian, I live in LA, you know, there's a lot of stuff you can, there are a lot of priors, right? I mean, perhaps Indians are prone to certain diseases or prone to certain behaviors. Those things you can already guess about me based upon my sort of public information about me. So I can't pretend that that is private. So really the privacy guarantee we can make is that you will not learn anything more about me by participating. Or essentially the study organizer will say, whether you choose to participate or not will not make any difference. No one will learn anything more about you other than whatever is already released. So that's the notion of privacy we want to give. So in this particular case, whatever these blacklisted activities are, I mean, okay, I'm a professor, probably a sedentary life, there's already a prior about certain activities that you could bring. Those I cannot hide, but beyond that is what we want to indistinguishable. So when we come to differential privacy later in the course, we're going to formalize this thing more. But in this particular case, the strategy that this MC system took was that it would, wherever the blacklisted stuff was happening, so it would basically use a classifier to kind of look at segments of time series, wherever the blacklisted stuff was happening, it would remove that and then replace it by kind of time series segments lifted from other parts of the data set and then blended in. Okay, so it would take, like for example, let's say I wanted to hide whatever smoking episodes. Okay, so wherever it thought I was smoking, detected using a classifier, it would then replace it by time series segment lifted from some other parts where I was not smoking, and then inserted it in so that hopefully it's not it blends nicely. There are two problems with this approach. One problem is that, of course, that classifier to detect smoking, the blacklist thing will have false positives and false negatives. Okay, so it's not perfect. And the second thing is that since we are lifting stuff from elsewhere, so potentially someone can detect, oh, gee, this time series segment perfectly matches that there is something fishy is going on. So it's very hard to make it indistinguishable entirely. Okay, so one has to be careful around, like in these settings, like what are we, what will the adversary do or not be able to do. So, but that's what this kind of system did. The other approach is something that I already mentioned, that we train a model and then we train the model parameters. So that was the GAN approach, or could be any other generative model. So in these cases, what we do is we basically have the data set and then we train a model and then we share the parameters of the model, but you have to be careful that the model training itself should be such that the model parameters don't leak the training data. So, so these are things which have begun to occur in the past few years. I mean, we are talking about kind of 2, 3, 4 year type time frame. Synthesizing time series sensor data, particularly complex physiological data, is non-trivial to get right, and still kind of largely an open problem. Another type of privacy problem that occurs in these things is what's also referred to as second and third party privacy. So thus far you're talking about my phone, my sensors. I'm kind of worried about that. But oftentimes we are in settings where we visit places and all where these are sensors operated by others, or you visit a place where. So things like, let's say there are people who collect sensor data about themselves. There is this whole community out there called Quantified Self. If you Google for it, you will see that there are a lot of people who basically have their life open book. So many of them wear sensors and all, and that's how they live their lives. They're always collecting everything about them. But some of the sensors that they wear capture signals of those around them also, right? I mean, if they're wearing a microphone or if they have a camera or something, it's picking up other things also. And likewise, people have sensors at their homes or stuff like that. So these kind of second and third party privacy issues are a pretty challenging thing. At some level, laws help out here. So like, for example, in California, the law is that if you are going to make any sort of audio recording, then you need to have permission from everyone involved in that process. And it leads to kind of funny situations. If I'm on a telcon with someone from Texas or Tennessee, they can record the call without telling me and without my permission, but I cannot record the call without seeking their permission. So it's kind of just asymmetric. So California is what's called as an all-party consent state. But the thing only applies to acoustic or whatever audio recordings. Okay, it doesn't apply to other things. In some other places, like I was recently in Burma over the winter break, Myanmar is it called now, and there the law is that if I take photo of any individual, like oftentimes people do street photography and take a photo of a street vendor and all, you are not allowed to. You need the other party's permission there. Okay, so it's against the law there to be able to do that. So privacy kind of things vary from locale to locale. So at some level, it's a hard problem to solve, right? I mean, impossible problem to solve, because this is basically saying if someone wants to spy on me, they'll figure a way out, hidden sensors and whatnot. So what are the technical measures we can take? So and then there is, right, the law, the threat of severe penalty. But can you think of technical measures that can help in this process? Assuming some lack of adversariality. Oftentimes the problem is not that I want to snoop on someone, but I just don't know when I can do what, right? I mean, so can you think of like ways of making these sensors and spaces kind of more responsible, more sensitive to privacy concerns? Say it again. Not sure quite what you're saying. Yeah, kind of. So I guess ideas in this space have boiled down to this notion that individuals can advertise their privacy preferences. So in some senses, there's a bubble around them, and as they move around, they're basically telling the sensor, don't sense me. Okay. Ideas for this have ranged from pretty cheesy to, like, there was a Microsoft paper where they would wear a QR code on their t-shirt. Okay, so the idea is the camera looks at you, so the QR code has your privacy policy, that will fuzz your face or whatnot. Okay, but to one where your phone advertises on sort of using Bluetooth or whatnot, that don't sense me. Okay, and then the responsible sensors kind of take an action in that regard. And then to one where you basically follow the local laws and all, right? I mean, so in the sense that if you deploy a camera in the public spaces, like UCLA has cameras kind of a lot of places, maybe fuzz the face out, detect the face and fuzz them out and all, right? Those kind of approaches. So that's one direction, right? That the sensors are responsible and but what they don't have a sense of, like, what your privacy wishes are. So if people were to somehow advertise, then they can modulate the collection process accordingly. The other approach is you take kind of a more that sensors are adversaries and I'm going to protect myself. So kind of there are, loosely speaking, two strategies that you can imagine. One is you are going to jam the sensors. Okay, so under this category, I've seen papers like they shine some sort of light and all, so that the cameras cannot take good photos. Okay, or emit some sort of a sound or something, so things can't be captured. Okay, so almost like create a shield, privacy shield around you. Okay, so I could do that. And then another one, which is more science fiction, is to make yourself invisible to the sensor somehow, right? So in electromagnetics and all, there are these concepts like metamaterials and all, which is essentially kind of make yourself non-sensible. The problem with a lot of these approaches is that they can work for one sensing modality, but not necessarily the others, okay, simultaneously. So, by the way, there's a third approach you can imagine, is that oftentimes sensors are hidden. So you could imagine technology can help you identify hidden sensors, okay, that, there is a sensor behind the wall, and also imagine James Bond, like you get to your hotel room and kind of tells you where all are the hidden sensors. And that's kind of the papers around that idea, because they detect electronics, the emissions from electronics, things like that. So essentially very fancy bug detectors, that's what they are. So that's what's kind of falls under this category, and I think there are a lot of potential project ideas around this that you might imagine. This is another example. So oftentimes we face a tension between someone wants to help you out and yet they have privacy concerns. So this example specifically was people who make reports about things happening out in the cities and all, and yet they are concerned about their own privacy. So for example, imagine, let's say, US military operating in a foreign city, and they have people from the local population who are helping out the US Army, but they're concerned about their own safety and all, because they're kind of revealing things on their co-citizens. So they want to make the report, hey, I saw this particular person hanging out in this part of the city and all, but they don't want to tell their own location. Okay, so I want to send a report without and I want you to know where the report is, but I still don't want you to know my location. Okay, so I want you to be able to detect the event but not know. So you can think of it as, in this case, the sensors want to keep their location private and not but yet assist in detection of the event, explosion or observation of a car and whatnot and all. So in this particular case, it turns out that you can think, so the very crude way, the way these localization systems work is that sensors publish the observation, like the observation could be the distance to something, distance to the event where we see it. So I see a red car 100 meters from me, and then also I publish my own location. And the idea is then by triangulating across multiple such reports, you can figure out where that red car was, right? So sensors can sense distances or directions. Those are the two very common ways of doing it. I see east of me at 100 meters, that's offending. The problem though is that for this thing to work, the sensor's locations also need to be known. So can we solve this problem without knowing the sensor location? Okay. Now, of course, some things about so let's say I'm able to solve this problem. Let's say I am able to solve this problem where the US Army, in my example, would be able to figure out where the event happened, but it doesn't need to know the locations of the individual sensors. Now, it doesn't mean that it knows nothing about the sensor location, right? I mean, from the location of the event, I still can figure something about where a particular sensor was. What can I figure out? So let's say again, let's say you neither get to know the distances nor the locations, but you get to know the answer, where the event happened. Now my question for you is, what am I leaking about in location of any given sensor? What statement can you make about it? Right, based on what? Well, so I'm not saying any of those, but you can basically say, make some statement about human eyes or radios or whatnot, what the typical range is. I know where the event is, so the sensor must be within that circle. So that is an inevitable loss of privacy. But otherwise, so this relates to the example I was giving last time around, which is I have secrets. In this case, the secrets were the location and the precise distance, but I want to help a global cause, that is collectively we want the US Army in this case to get to know where the event happened, but we don't want to reveal our individual things. So, so there are many ways to kind of think about solving this problem. One which really doesn't cut it, we all agree that there is a trusted neutral party, we are going to send it and it will not reveal my location. That really doesn't work. So we really want to find some other ways. So one way to solving this thing is called secure multi-party computation. So that's kind of one way of solving it, and that's a general way of solving it. But the other is you can also, for specific problem settings, you could do things which maintain privacy. So it turns out in this particular case, normally the way these localization algorithms, when they combine this data, they essentially solve a convex optimization problem. And it turns out in this particular case, you could, instead of publishing these values, the sensors publish kind of information about geometric information in a different font, okay, without the center obviously, and they publish this thing in a manner which allows the same convex optimization problem to be solved without the person you are publishing it to getting to know where you are. Okay, so I'll not go into the details out here, but the notion is that I can transform the data, each party can transform the data such that the combination of that data will still reveal the correct answer, in this case a correct solution to the convex optimization problem, but we are actually publishing obfuscated data. Okay, so the structure of the problem could be made use of, and it turns out that for all convex optimization problems you can do it this way, but other problems may have other structures to it. Like, to give you an example, let's say we want to compute average over a large population. One way you could do it is you can tell everyone add noise to your reading from this distribution, and then averaged over the large population, the noise will cancel out. So that's a trivial example of how everyone can lie, and I will not be able to say anything about any individual, yet the overall answer might still be correct. Okay, I think I already mentioned this principle of least privilege, so I'm going to skip that. So one thing I would say is, because during the discussions about the projects with some of the groups and all, I think one class of problems which essentially I would say at this point you can put it under the category of solved problems and therefore not think of doing any project around that. And that is, if I want to protect the content of a message or a file against snoops by encrypting it, that we know how to do very well. So let's look at an example. Let's say an IoT device wants to talk to some sort of a server or a gateway. So it sends messages over some communication channel, and the problem of encrypting this so that it receives on the other side, and encrypting it so that for all practical purposes it is non-breakable, is we know how to do the encryption. We know even how to do the encryption so that even future quantum computers won't be able to break it, or even though that's kind of an area of research right now, but there are lots of proposals and solutions that exist. The barrier comes from things around this. So we know, again, encryption, whenever encryption is broken, it's not because the crypto algorithm is broken. It is because some of the things that the crypto schemes depend on get broken. So first thing is that when we use encryption, there are very crudely two forms of encryption. One which are called symmetric encryption, symmetric cryptography, where both parties have the same key. I encrypt the data, you decrypt the data, we both have the same keys. That can be done very, very efficiently. Our processors have instructions for it. Intel processors have an instruction for doing what is called as AES encryption, which is kind of the standard. The other type of encryption is called public-private key encryption, okay, and the way it works is I have a private key, I encrypt using that, and then I give the data to you, and you have, using the public key, you can decrypt it. The issue there is that it relies on math, which is slow, so you can't do it at high rate. Okay, so the way typically these encryption systems work is that we use symmetric encryption, but in order for us to do that, we need that shared secret key. So how can we get the shared secret key? So one way is maybe at some point in time we met and we agreed upon the shared secret key and also a strategy to update it. Okay, so that's one approach. Another approach is somehow we find a way to establish that shared secret key, and it turns out that the public-private key crypto can help in that process. So there are strategies where I can establish a shared secret with someone without anyone else knowing. So essentially I can engage in a protocol with one of you, at the end of which I and you will know an X, which no one else who's listening to that message can know. So we can solve that problem. We'll see in 2 lectures from now what kind of methods very crudely appear for that. So we can solve that problem. The third problem that remains, so that's one approach. The other approach is we physically met. We also see that in play whenever we pair devices, right? I mean, whenever we pair a sensor with our phone and all, what happens? We kind of bring it close so that it's within the short radio range. It asks for, do you see this number out there? And you approve, and kind of some process like that happens. So we see it routinely. So the problem then remains is, how do I know the other party is indeed the party? So let's say I was trying to talk with Swapnil. How do I know that the other party is actually Swapnil and not someone pretending to be Swapnil? So now we are into this issue of and there could be other things. So now imagine if there's a sensor I'm pairing, I can see both. I can say, hey, it's my sensor and not someone else's sensor. So I have visual confirmation. It's close by, I can see there is no adversary, all those kind of things can be done. If I'm pairing something, maybe I'll make sure that no one was looking over my shoulder to do that. So I can rely on proximity and safety of my surrounding and using a communication strategy which is like Bluetooth or NFC or something like that to kind of do it. So I can do that. But when we are talking with faraway thing, it's a challenge. So this is where the whole notion of certificates come into play. So you often on the browsers and all, you see, hey, the digital certificate may be getting forged and all. So what happens there is that the society at large has now developed this infrastructure where our identities are vouched for by a select few directly or indirectly. So like I may have a certificate which is issued by, let's say, Apple, because I use Apple devices, but Apple certificate itself is vouched for by the few companies who are in this business, VeriSign, AT&T, some of these companies. So there is a whole hierarchy. Essentially, it's a trust tree which exists. You trust me because someone else who is trusted vouches for me, and kind of that whole process builds up. So back to this encryption, the basic encryption strategies are, we know at least algorithmically how to do very well. It's all this other stuff and then the implementation of these things. So a naive mistake that I often see is the following. You'll say, you know, I'll implement my own crypto algorithm. Never do that. We'll say, oh, this is too heavyweight, I'm going to use a lightweight algorithm which I devise. Never do that. The reason you don't want to implement an algorithm yourself is because if a poor implementation can leak the keys away. So for example, if you're running the encryption algorithm and if the power profile is tells someone snooping at it, or how much time it takes, tells the system, tells someone else snooping on your system what the key values were, then you have lost the game. So these crypto implementations are designed by experts who know what they are doing. They try to do things like the computation time, the power consumption, all these things remain constant. In our sensory context, you might imagine the following. Another example of being leaked away, right? I mean, let's say every time I do something sensitive, a packet message goes out from the sensor. But obviously then an adversary doesn't need to break the messages. It can just look at the fact that there is a transmission going out. So how would you protect against that? These kind of things where the act of computing or act of transmission is giving away the secret. Huh? How? Transmit, yeah. So you basically do, so firstly you so one strategy is always transmit, and the content could say yes, there is someone, or there is no someone, or do some randomized transmissions. So to the extent people have now begun, when they implement code and all, that you will find compilers which produce constant time code, for example, on the computation side, or that they attempt to mask the power profile of the computation or communication so that the adversary doesn't gain any information out of it. So encryption, we know how to do well, but it has to be done very, very carefully. The classical model of encryption, as I mentioned a short bit ago, is basically I encrypt, you decrypt. The problem with this is that if I am trying to do some computation out on some server or some other node, then we run into problem, because let's say in this case, some IoT device or some edge device, I have X, I need f of X, so I want, and I don't have the compute power to do f of X. So what I do is I send X, the server computes f of X and sends it to me. So now, of course, we are security paranoid, so we are going to encrypt X and we are going to encrypt X also. So both links are encrypted, and in a modern implementation, if you were to want encryption, the easiest way for you to do is to either use SSL tunnels or send data over HTTP. So it kind of takes care, or use VPN. Okay, so it kind of takes care of it. Now, but the problem out here is I still need to tell this server the key so that it can decrypt X, compute f of X, and then encrypt it. Okay, so what if I don't trust the server either? So this is the challenge out here, is that the decryption is kind of inflexible, and it's also all or nothing. Like when I, let's say I have X, and I put encrypted X out here, but the problem often is that to one user I want to give f of X, to another service I want to give g of X. I want to have different statistics about the data given to different users. So I also want to achieve that. So in the simplistic view of encryption, it doesn't work, because it's like I encrypt the whole X and then I have to decrypt the whole X. So this way I will get to know the whole X. I can't kind of hide it away. So that doesn't work. So there are, in recent years, there are newer forms of cryptographic methods which have emerged, which allow processing over encrypted data. So the idea is I can have servers which basically will accept encrypted data, so data encrypted using some key, but these guys don't need to know the key. They can still do the processing very efficiently and send back the result. So that's the inference. So the inference comes from the data, and that's encrypted. So the idea is nowhere in this thing, the only entity which knows the key is the source. So the source generates the key, encrypts the data, sends the data, processing happens over the encrypted data, the result comes back, and the result is automatically encrypted, and you kind of do it. So this whole area is called computation over encrypted data. There are libraries for doing it and all. For the general case, it's extremely inefficient still by a few order of magnitudes, but for selective cases like database queries and certain types of computation and all, it can be done reasonably efficiently, and there are hardware assets, FPGAs, things like that to help out with that. So this is what is called as homomorphic encryption and partially homomorphic encryption, but that's kind of the strategy out there. Let's see. Another type of well, actually, an example of this might simply be, let's say I'm taking photos on my camera, a lot of them are private, I would rather no one else know, so I want to send them to a server for processing, maybe to detect, like nowadays, oftentimes the phone do things like write down whose face it is or what place and all, but I don't want Apple or Google or Google, knowing, so what we'd like to do is to send encrypted images, and then the processing to take place entirely on the encrypted images and stuff like that. So these kind of systems are doable at this point. There are other approaches to achieving similar objectives also. Another approach which is the following. I chop up the data, okay, and then send different parts to different servers, and have them process it and then reassemble it back. And in that case, the notion is these are independent servers. They are not going to collude. So I'm relying on diversity of the other parties and the fact that they're not going to collude, that it's unlikely that they're going to collude. So there are schemes based around that approach also. Already, I think a couple of project groups are kind of dancing around these kind of things. Let's see. Yeah, this is an example of some work out of MIT where they kind of showed a whole bunch of machine learning systems could be efficiently implemented. So essentially, what the problem or the attacker model, to use the security jargon, is the threat model is honest but curious adversary. So that's a very common model which is assumed that I have a service provider. That service provider is going to provide me good service, because if it were not, I will refuse to be its client, and I can certainly detect that it's giving me wrong things because I can feed it some test data and see how it performs. So the service provider is competent, honest, does the thing, follows the protocol, but it is curious, and we want to kind of prevent that from happening. So it's a very common situation that kind of occurs. An alternative way of solving this problem that exists, and maybe kind of an area where some of you might still want to explore in projects, and it is using these hardware enclaves, which I have mentioned earlier also. But basically, modern processors in recent years have this notion of secure hardware enclaves, where the idea was they are trying to protect the application against an operating system which has been compromised. So they want to make sure that the secrets within the application are not leaked because the OS gets compromised. Right? Traditionally, in our operating systems, in our machines, operating system is kind of God, right? It has access to everything. It can look at every memory location, stuff like that. But now in these systems, they have created kind of a part of the processor which has a security, which is secure but designed. So this is what is called as the trusted hardware. Okay, And idea is within that you can run code, and yet the OS cannot know what code is running, what its data values were, and stuff like that. So when it uses memory, the stuff that goes into the memory is encrypted. So if the OS can look at those locations, but it will see gibberish right now. So essentially the problem that we are solving is that traditionally, if a malicious app somehow compromises the operating system, then all other apps basically lose their integrity and privacy. Whereas in this particular case, using these technologies like STS, Intel, and some other processor vendors, basically what happens is that an app can run inside the enclave and be protected against these things. And more importantly, unlike homomorphic encryption and all, there is basically no performance loss because it runs in full speed, just like native code and all. Okay, but what you give away in this process is that you have to trust Intel SGX. Okay, so that is implemented in microcode at the hardware level. So if Intel wants to mess things up, they certainly can. So this whole notion is called trusted computing base or trusted computing environments, and you are basically so now let's say you run something on Amazon Cloud, you can trust that even Amazon will not be able to sort of look at your data and all. This basically, as long as you trust Intel, you get to as a valid Intel processor. It is not Intel processor being faked on an FPGA so that Amazon can look at everything. None of that. I mean, you're guaranteed at that level. And the way that happens is that Intel buries into the processor hardware the key information and all that you need to establish all this stuff. So it's a pretty exciting technology. On the other hand, it's a pretty complex technology, and so there are a lot of side channels and all using which people have attempted to sort of break it and stuff like that. So there is a whole bunch of challenges that, as you can see, that occur under the security umbrella. So one thing is that when you think about projects and all, like you don't say I want to make this thing secure, because as we saw, there are so many different things that fall under this umbrella. You have to be a lot more specific what problem you are kind of addressing there. Okay, so I've kind of listed some of these things that commonly are encountered with IoT devices in particular. So issues of secure configuration. Okay, if things are not secured, so all these different parameters as locations, stuff like that. Things may have multiple owners. That may make things, stuff very challenging. Occupants move across environments. I mean, you move around and all. You encounter also different IoT devices. Devices move across environments, so their network connectivity and all things. We change ownerships. So like you sell a house or you move, right? I mean, the ownership of the devices or transfer to a new. There are too many of these devices, so even processes like how do I discover and identify there is a new device on my home network, is it a valid one, or did some service person visiting my home sort of put it there. Things may fail. One of the issues also is oftentimes we buy things and all, and we think that, oh, this vendor has very privacy friendly policies, and a year later they are bought by another company and the privacy policies change. Vendors disappear, so devices go unsupported, no longer updates happening at all. When you throw away these IoT devices, someone can extract information from their flash and all, and so one has to be careful there. Like for example, if nowadays, like if you are getting rid of your car, you better make sure that your home link is disabled, stuff like that. Otherwise, the new owner can enter your garage perfectly easily. So there are lots of these other vectors that happen. And also these things are not professionally managed. I mean, it's normal users which are doing. So these are all sort of specific aspects. So as you think about security, it's very hard to simply say, oh, I'm trying to make this thing secure, because there's just not one element out here. So I've listed some of the questions that people tend to explore out here. So whole bunch of things out there, and like I said, I mean, there's some problems like better encryption and all are probably at this stage are uninteresting, simply because whatever remains to be done is so super hard that that's not what this course is about. But really kind of go after some of these more practically encountered kind of problems. And the final thing before move on is the following. Things like security and privacy and all are never in isolation. There is no such thing as perfectly private or perfectly secure. It's always relative to some sort of a cost-benefit analysis. As I said earlier, I can be totally private, but then I will not accomplish pretty much anything in life, totally kind of zero utility and likely also zero productivity and zero fairness and whatnot. So you always, when you think of these systems and all, it's always a give and take. Some degree of security and privacy inefficiency or whatever, non-ideal security and non-ideal privacy is needed to accomplish things in life. And also, it's hard to design systems if you don't trust anything. There has to be something you trust. So the trust could be in an entity, like by using my phone, I'm pretty much have to trust Apple, this hardware, OS, and you could both its competence and its intent and all. So that's one form of trust. There are also other things you can trust. What are the things we can trust, period? Like unambiguously, laws of physics, right? Mathematical constraints. These are things which, if we rely on, work in our favor, because no one else can kind of violate them either. So we'll see that a lot of systems and all, and trust in my knowledge about the properties of physical system, right? I mean, that's going to behave some ways. So one has to kind of prioritize one's risks and decide what to trust and what not to trust as you go around designing these systems. So that was a long, I guess 2 days. Yeah, I spent 2 full lectures and more actually on this, but hopefully it gives you enough of a broad view so that you can at least think in terms of what project topics might interest you, and then to help define a project, again, come and talk to me. There is absolutely no substitute for it, and like I said, many of you have done that. So what I'm going to do now is, you want to take a short break, or anyone in favor? No? Okay, cool. So we'll continue. So the next thing I want to do is to look at sort of some of these problems in context of 3 specific use cases or kind of classes of systems, just to show you what kind of things have happened and all in specific domains. And so it's basically a set of case studies, if you may, of different application domains, just to kind of show you what kind of things are happening. So the first case I want to go after is medical devices and specifically medical implants. So what are medical implants? Pacemaker is probably the most well-known one, but nowadays there are a whole bunch of other kind of things also. There are implantable defibrillators, which actually jolt your heart when it goes into fibrillation. There are brain implants. There are these things called deep brain stimulators. There are insulin pumps, and I'm sure there are spinal cord related stuff. There are a whole bunch of things. Essentially, electricity is kind of a powerful way of dealing with some of the ailments that we have. So they're becoming extremely common. And um, what else did I make? Cochlear implants are the ear one. There is eye related stuff which has come out. Anyway, they are there used to be a time that they were basically implanted and then at some point removed to replace batteries, and that was it. But nowadays, much like anything else, they have become really smart, connected, perhaps with an app around it, stuff like that. And these are extremely resource constrained, needless to say. They're sitting inside our bodies, and also hard to replace, right? I mean, in many cases, it's pretty invasive surgery that is needed. And yet, because they are getting connected and complicated, they're also susceptible to all sort of cyber physical attacks. So very broadly, two types of things. One is leaking personal information, so leaking patient identification, and also even things like sort of getting to know that a person has a particular medical ailment. If the pacemaker inside their body is advertising away a radio message and I pick it up, then right, I mean, so there's a breach of privacy for sure. And then also physical harm to the patient, because maybe I can use those wireless channels as attack vectors to do harmful things like cause an overdose or cause a seizure and things like that. So cardioverter defibrillators, which I referred to a short while ago, are a specific instance of an implantable device. So basically their purpose is that they give pulse to pace the heart, but the main difference from pacemaker, so pacemaker kind of basically gives tiny jolts at different times, so just kind of smoothen the heart rhythm. Whereas what defibrillators do is when the heart goes into some serious condition, it gives a big jolt. It's kind of the equivalent of these external defibrillators you may see in our buildings and all. They have these paddles and they put it on the chest, and kind of a big jolt is given to kind of almost like restart the heart and all. So that's what these implantable defibrillators do, and they have wireless links in them, and typically there are two types of wireless links that exist in them. There are long-range wireless links whose purpose is to inform malfunction. Doctors and companies and stuff like that, and then there are short range links which are typically for really close quarters, so like few inches away, so that you can retune or reprogram these things. So like what happens typically with these patients is that on some periodic schedule they visit their doctor, and then based upon their current condition there are some adjustments that are done to these devices. So again, you don't want to open up the patient every time this happens, so there is a short range wireless link which happens, and then typically there's some sort of an external device which kind of does this communication. So kind of attacks that people have shown. So a lot of these underlying technologies happened in a innocent era where people never thought anyone would bother hacking into these things and all. That would be rude and whatnot, but of course that's not the case anymore. So first type of attacks really are attacks on privacy, where essentially using the radio signals, attacks interference. So using radio signals, you cause interference. So for example, I place devices near the defibrillator and then cause the defibrillator to misfire. So this is closer to being kind of like jamming or spoofing the sensor signal. So if we can give a false heart signal, or in other kind of devices, similar things. It turns out oftentimes it happens for non-adversarial reasons, so things like getting unintended jolts in the defibrillator. Something is hard to relate, but remember, these are like the description which is usually given is almost like someone hit your heart, like this box shape. Okay, so it seems like other surroundings, so even unintentionally happens, but certainly in an adversarial setting, so can be done. The other, so in this case, is simply the interference, but also more explicitly exploiting the wireless links. And the issue out here has been that like I said, these systems were designed in a more innocent era. So typically the wireless links were not encrypted. They were thought, this is a short range link, no need and all. So kind of things which can happen are you can intercept the message and then you can get information about the patient. So some of these devices were designed pretty stupidly. So the device will not simply transmit a ID, but it will actually also include patient number. So like patient name and all. Okay, so they will whatever this is a defibrillator and belongs to John Doe and blah blah blah. So other information. Even if you didn't do it, it becomes kind of like a tracking ID, right? I mean, the same ID seen at multiple places gives kind of a unique fingerprint. It can be this wireless links, because they are non-encrypted. They can also be used to change the device setting and all. And then finally kind of do denial of service attacks, where you kind of jam this link to cause all sort of problems. So again, sort of in recent years, I think as security community got interested in sort of security in context of IoT, there have been a lot of papers showing these kind of vulnerabilities and all that exist. And in real life, I think I briefly mentioned this, but Vice President Dick Cheney's defibrillator was modified out of these kind of concerns so that it won't get attacked and all. And then subsequently on Showtime, an episode on Showtime's Homeland had this kind of a attack. So while it's difficult to do these kind of hackings, it's not something that sort of a random Joe can do it, but all of you can do it. I mean, the hacking radios now is not hard. On Amazon you can buy USB radios, radio transceivers for, let's say, order of $100 for simpler stuff, and certainly in sub $1,000 range you can buy pretty sophisticated things. And then thanks to open source community, there is this nice thing called GNU Radio, which is essentially a signal processing package which works with these radio peripherals to let you do all sort of information hacking, transmission, stuff like that and all. So that exists at this stage. With some modest effort you can do it, and actually in the past 2 years some of the interesting projects in the course have made use of those kind of technologies. So if any of you want to pursue things in terms of sort of wireless radio level kind of stuff, we have these GNU Radio type stuff and all that we can set you up with. Another example, this was work out of Princeton, where they sought to hack insulin pumps. So insulin pumps are obviously for diabetic patients, and the idea is they go subdermally, so kind of under the fat layer, and essentially the intent is that they monitor the glucose level and then they keep pumping the infused insulin to kind of keep the glucose level under control. So it's for the more severe cases of diabetes, but so they've been around and they've improved quite a bit now. Pregnant women get it, chronic diabetes patients get it and all, and nowadays they usually have a app on your iPhone and kind of giving you the status and all. So kind of pretty snazzy looking kind of devices nowadays. Again, lots of attacks shown. The genesis of all these attacks against is poorly designed things. Okay, so either not encrypted or easily hackable. So oftentimes in order for your remember I talked about the pairing thing, so oftentimes the pairing processes in these devices are insecure, so I can easily begin to talk to someone else's insulin pump, or if there was a pin code and all, it was being transmitted over the air. So by grabbing the transmissions over the air, which these guys did with the GNU Radio setup, you basically have everything in front. So you kind of capture the packet, and then there are, just like you have I don't know, some of you may have heard of Wireshark and these kind of tools which let you hack into the network. So there are similarly tools which kind of let you grab the bits and then you feed them into some Python code and kind of figure out what is happening. So So that's what these guys did. So privacy attacks and integrity attacks, both of them. So again, privacy attacks typically again are, we can get to know identities of the patients and all, but also kind of the extent of their disease and things like that, and that we all agree is something that most of us would like to keep private. Integrity attacks where you can affect the correctness of the operation, so you can control the insulin level and all these kind of things, which are potentially fatal consequences. And then finally, simply attacks on availability. So it turns out sometimes the weakness is not on the pump side, but it's really kind of on the app side. So these guys kind of showed a whole bunch of things, and there are often kind of articles and all around these things. I just highlighted kind of the flaws primarily stem from a lack of encryption. So that's a very common complaint, that these things were often designed where basically either they will not use any encryption, or they will use really stupidly weak encryption, which is inexcusable. But the problem often happens is that these things are designed not by people who are security experts, but they are designed by electrical engineers like me, or mechanical engineers, or non-security professionals. So so something which looks obfuscated is often or using keys which are very weak, keys which can just be subjected to exhaustive search and then breaking it. All these kind of problems come into play. One of the most well-known fiasco around this was the IEEE 802.11 Wi-Fi standard, which we all use. So the first generation of it had used crypto mechanism, which was hilariously breakable. Okay, you for to spend an hour next to someone, you could just kind of break the thing using your laptop. And the reason simply was that on that entire committee which was designing it, it was basically made of circuit people from electrical engineering. Okay, so they kind of designed the thing and all, and of course had deep flaws in that process. So I think at least some of these widely deployed standards and all, they have gotten wiser, but a lot of these devices and all are made by small companies, boutique companies. They cannot afford to have a crypto expert on their team and all. So these things. Now, what should you do if you are designing, ever in the state of designing? As I'll talk a couple of lectures from now, the standard is something called AES. Just use AES. Don't use anything else. There are good implementations available. They are supported on the processor. There is no excuse not to use them. Things like, oh, it's too computationally hungry and all, are not really a valid reason, because security, there is no such thing as security privacy trade-off. Trade-off happens between two continuous variables. It doesn't happen between a binary variable and a continuous variable. So either you are secure or insecure. It's not a smooth trade-off. So don't ever delude yourself that I can do kind of a meaningful trade-off between security and speed and power. Just doesn't work that way. Okay, so medical implants have been a favorite target, and the problem is challenging there. Okay, because they are resource constrained, admitted for sure. Stuff going inside brain and heart and all, you do want the battery life to be long enough and all, and yet these are also very safety critical in many ways. Okay, next one, vehicles are favorite IoT device, right? We all enjoy cars. So cars have been a favorite target for hackers. Now vehicles of all type exist, but I guess I'm going to focus more on cars. But of course you have planes and underwater stuff and things like that. I always enjoy sitting in planes, and when you have those entertainment units and when they boot up and you see the Linux boot stream and stuff like that, and if you actually go to Google and all, and people try all sort of things by trying to break into it, by trying different key combinations and things like that. And so a lot of times the challenge out there is that these are devices out in the public, and of course a bored computer scientist can try all sorts of interesting things on these devices. So people attempt to hack everything, right? Every port that may exist, try to kind of poke into it and connect instruments and all. So it's a so there's no shortage of opportunities. The trend out here is they're highly connected, right? I mean, our cars talk to cloud services, our cars talk to, in many cases, nearby infrastructure also, and also cars to car kind of communication. We have sophisticated GPUs and all in our cars now for autonomy and other such purposes. And finally, there are the global, the supply chain are pretty global. So often what happens is, while you may think my car is different than yours, but the subsystem may actually be from the same vendor, okay, because the common vendor is separated. So a modern vehicle has a really huge number of onboard computers. They're called ECUs, and other vehicles, planes and all, obviously have even more. So increased susceptibility to CPS attacks of various forms. So one attack vector is the wireless communication link. Nowadays, many things in the car are wireless. One good example is the tire pressure sensor. So pressure sensor for tires come in two varieties. One where they basically have a sensor built into that little valve attached to the tire, and that's where the pressure gets sensed, and then is wirelessly sent using a short range wireless link to some onboard computer. And the other one they do it is by measuring the wheel rotation. So basically now you're not sensing the pressure directly, but you're sensing the fact that if the pressure changes, then the diameter changes, and therefore the rotational aspects change, and you kind of infer from that. Going to the former one, so this tire pressure sensor is a tiny little device sensing the pressure and sensing the pressure reading along with an ID, right? So that you get to know you are talking to the correct sensor. What attacks can you imagine with that? How can you misuse that? And now again, think with an attacker hat on. So, okay, so I can, is this it again? Yeah. Okay, so I could inject, if it was not encrypted and not authenticated, I can inject false readings, and then whatever consequences follow, right? I mean, I can suddenly panic that driver saying, hey, your tire has deflated or something like that. Okay, so that's one. What else? Think something more nefarious. I can identify the vehicle repeatedly going, right? I mean, the paper I had originally read, it had proposed a smart roadside bomb, which will only explode when that particular vehicle was going by. Okay, so that was kind of the one in that paper. Okay, so anyway, so devices in the vehicles are wireless. Devices near the vehicles, so keys and garage doors, these are favorite things that people have studied. Being able to open your garage door, a lot of American homes, once you enter the garage, you have basically free access to the interior door and you can roam inside the house. And then keys, stealing your car, lot of thefts. I mean, some high profile thefts last year of Teslas in Europe, where they caught videos of people coming with laptops and walking away with a Tesla. So those kind of things. Roadside infrastructure. So there is a wireless standard called DSRC, which is basically like our Wi-Fi, and it's used for traffic control purposes and all. So that has been a favorite vector of attack. GPS, while GPS is one way, but if I can, as I mentioned earlier last week, I can spoof GPS information and all. Cars rely on telematic services, usually through LTE, or 5G, I guess, soon. So these are for purposes such as fleet management and condition-based maintenance. So like your car warns you that, or tells the dealer or whatever that some problems and things like that. Software updates and things like that. And then also using the same DSRC, there is this whole concept of VANET, vehicular area networks, VANET, which has emerged, and the idea is cars can talk to each other, cars can talk to nearby cars for a variety of purposes, but very commonly it is so that you can coordinate, particularly in autonomous settings. So one very common form of autonomy that people have experimented with is convoys of autonomous cars or trucks in particular. So the lead truck may have a driver, and then all the following trucks are autonomous and they talk to this thing. So if the front truck sees an obstacle in front, it immediately informs everyone in the back and all. So UC Berkeley and UC Irvine, they have very nice centers in this space. So a lot of work happens there in this space. So these are all type of things which are happening, and then you see them in cars or some other things like, for example, buses and ambulances and police cars. They can actually directly talk to the traffic control system. So when a bus comes close to an intersection, it gets the priority over for green light, things like that happening as well. UAVs is another one. So now attacking wireless. So as I mentioned a short while ago, theoretically it is now pretty straightforward to do. So disruption is easy, because if it is a fixed frequency channel, then all I need to do is to send noise to jam. So GPS signals are an example of that. I could also do excessive packet traffic. So like if I know the wireless Wi-Fi channel, I can kind of just flood it with traffic and then just essentially bring the network to crawl. Snooping, I can, so as we saw, if crypto was not being used or weak crypto is used, I can break it and look at the content. I can break the cipher if it was a poor crypto protocol. There is also so-called man-in-the-middle attack. So what man-in-the-middle literally refers to is the following: A and B are talking to them, and I am in the middle. Basically talk to A pretending as if I am B, and talk to B pretending as if I am in A. So for example, if your computer wants that someone I don't know, like on Safari on Apple, it says this site might be, someone may be pretending to be this site. So what is really happening there is that it's trying to establish a secure connection with the web server, except that the certificate isn't right. And so one possible cause is that someone in the middle is trying to impersonate the real thing. I at this point usually say no, even though it may mean I'm going without that favorite website for a while, because I don't want to have my computer begin to trust certificates which I don't, which I ought not to, because once it becomes a trusted certificate, a lot of other things become weakened. So this man in the middle is a serious one, and this is why establishing the identity becomes very important, right? Right in that initial stage when you are setting up the session. So I'm sure most of you use SSH in some shape and form. How many of you use the keys in SSH? Okay, so like half the class. You should always use those keys, okay, and you should always set, because that's the securest way of kind of getting things going. Extremely important. Okay, tamper. So tamper boils down to jam, relay, replay. So the idea would be, I think I mentioned it in context of the attack on that American drone, but kind of the idea is that I will prevent, the adversary will prevent the valid message from getting in being received, and do so by jamming, which we can do through the through strategy 1, and then relay and replay. So we'll see some examples of these. What makes these things possible is all these what are called as software defined radios exist. So I've shown you some example. USRP stands for Universal Software Radio Peripheral. You can buy it from National Instruments, or you can buy it cheaply elsewhere. But I think the company is not owned by National Instruments. Hack RF1, the name even suggests it's meant for hacking. TV SDR, blind SDR, and there's kind of a few others which are really cheap. And of course, the difference between these things typically is what band they cover. Like some of the USRPs can go all the way from 0 to 7 or 8 gigahertz, and you can cause issues all over. And some of them are more narrower band. So all those kind of things exist. High-end USRPs can go up to $10,000, $20,000, but then they're super sophisticated. The low-end ones are probably $400 or $500, but these kind of ones, Hack RF $200. These are in the same range. Okay, and then the back-end software for these things almost universally is the GNU radio, which is works on Macs, PCs, Linux, and in some cases these things are self-contained also. So essentially what you can do with GNU radio is, what these devices give you is, they downshift the signal, sample it, and then they basically give you the IQ samples, which is basically the complex value sampling of the radio signal. And then all the modulation, all the stuff that a typical radio hardware does now happens in this GNU radio software. And so you can create your own things, you can snoop easily, and then the software community is pretty sophisticated, and you can take all this stuff and feed it into all sort of stuff. It can just decode and display for you the content of the messages, and also Wireshark and all you could do. So a lot of cool stuff you can do around these things there, and you can also transmit. The only issue is that transmission in any licensed band is illegal. So, but of course, people still do it in the hope that they don't get caught, or you do it in a lab setting inside a Faraday cage. And actually, even if you are transmitting in so-called free bands, ISM bands, even then you have to be careful not to cause any disruption. So these are like, you could do a lot of chaos in your vicinity. Like imagine transmitting on the cellular radio bands and creating sort of all sorts of issues. But the power to do it exists. These devices can transmit in all sort of bands. So, so what kind of things have people explored out here? So, modern vehicles have over the recent years have gradually adopted lots of interesting technologies. So one is these so-called immobilization systems, and basic idea is that, you know, if you look at old Hollywood movies and all, they would our hero will go into the car, and then suddenly bad guy is chasing, and they'll kind of short two wires, and the car starts and they move, right? Not possible nowadays because your car authenticates the key. So your car key has a RFID tag or something like that, and so you can't start a car without an authentic key. So typically what happens is that in the key shell there is the RFID transponder, and then inside the car there is a transponder which interrogates the key. Essentially the key is proving that it's a valid key. So that's what sort of goes on out here. So most of these RFID immobilizers, the problem is that they can be cloned. So you can buy on eBay machines which will basically let you clone an RFID tag. So and the thing is also part of so the way these things work is the tag is talking to the transponder using some protocol, and they use some crypto key, encryption scheme, but they are pretty weak. So the number of bits of keys are pretty like, let's say, of the order of 100 bits if you're lucky. And these things can be broken very rapidly, particularly if you are willing to use FPGAs or things like that. So essentially, in an old era, they might have sufficed, but nowadays, breaking keys of the order of 100 bits or so. So at the bare minimum, you need to use, again, good crypto and key sizes of 128 or better yet 256 to be kind of a bit feature proof. And the other thing is flawed implementation. So oftentimes what happens is, while the key may claim to be 100 bit, but the true randomness in the key may be far less than 100 bit. So essentially, what you really care about is how much entropy exists in whatever you are claiming to be the key. So if there is predictability in key, that effectively removes some of the bits, and you are left with effectively a smaller search space. So the implementations of these things are often quite flawed, so that even though the advertised key length might be some of these numbers, the effective key length is actually even lower. So essentially easily breakable implementations. Then what you have are, besides these immobilizers, the other kind of things that we find are remote keyless entry systems. So what happens with these remote keyless entry systems is that you go near the car, you press a button, and the car door opens, right? Or even more modern systems, you walk close to the car and the car door just opens for you, right? I mean, no need to even press a button. So these kind of strategies where you send a UID along with a button, the car opens. So what this guy can do is, it can capture whatever you're transmitting and then replay it, and it will open, right? I can always, using the radio, capture the radio segment, store it in a file, and whenever time comes, I can just play it out. Okay. So these kind of schemes were the early schemes, and they have this key flaw that an eavesdropper can basically listen and replay. So how would you fix this thing? Well, I have to make it somehow impossible to simply mount a replay, right? That is, the signal that I'm sending every time should differ in some manner, and differ in an unpredictable manner, right? If it is predictable, again the eavesdropper can do it. So it should change, and it should change in an unpredictable manner. So this is how things get done. I'll send the UID, and I'll send the button ID together with a counter and encrypt this. Okay. Next time I'm going to send counter +1, encrypt this. Next time I'm going to send counter +2, encrypt this. Now, when we encrypt something, if it's a good encryption scheme, then the output will basically be random. Okay. Without knowing the key, it will pass all. It should pass all the randomness tests. So essentially, even if the adversary was to capture one of these, there is no hope for, without knowing the key, there is no hope for predicting what the next one is going to be. And then you also have to sort of worry about the possibilities that, like we fiddle with our keys and all. So you might be in office and you might have pressed the button a few times, and so the counter in the key advanced, but the counter in the card didn't, right? So what happens in the decryption side is that it actually looks for nearby counter values also to account for these possibilities. And then usually kind of these things are rollover, so this kind of counter kind of goes around. So that's why it's called rolling code. So actually, you'll see this term used in sales pitch for garage doors, like rolling code garage doors. So that's basically what's happening under the hood. Now, of course, all of this thing is premised that I cannot break this thing, right? Because as an adversary, I can certainly capture a whole bunch of these, right? So what I'm capturing is a whole bunch of examples where I know the counter field is just being incremented by 1, right? I mean, so if so I already know something about the plain text as it's called, or underlying unencrypted text. So if the key is weak, I can easily break it by doing a brute force search over it. So I need, and like I said, brute force search you can do up to, let's say, 100 plus keys very easily nowadays with modern hardware. So you have to use sort of sufficient number of bits in this case. So so the issues that, so another issue which comes up out here is the key management. So remember, this key has to be paired with it. And so under the hood, what happens is that these cars are made with a certain number of global master keys. And it's kind of like, you can almost think of some select backdoors into the system. And if they get discovered, and even accidentally so by someone trying out and say, aha, it works, then essentially that key gets compromised, and the only way to then deal with it is to revoke it. So often, so that's what, for example, you guys are, you're all too young, but in 1990s when DVD players had first come out, there was this whole fiasco over the master key that the DVD players had embedded was broken and published, and it was kind of a free speech kind of an issue, so all over the internet and all. So essentially the only option was to kind of revoke it, because otherwise movies were being like to pirate the movies basically. Okay, so that's one, and the other one is like as I mentioned, attack the crypto. Okay, so either the key was weak, or you can mount sites and attacks and all, because here it's your car. If you find, so you can do all sort of like attacks and all. So while certainly these schemes help, they are not sort of entirely you're not kind of scot-free this thing. So it's been a favorite topic for researchers, and lots of papers at top conferences in recent years around it. Okay, so the final, the newest type of systems that have emerged are systems which are entirely proximity based, no button press required. So like I said, you walk near your car, the door unlocks, so you just open the door, or in some cases like the Tesla Model X, the door even opens for you. You just go inside the car, press the start button, and you're good to go, right? So nothing needed. Okay. So so what happens in this particular case is that when you walk, when you are in the proximity of the car, then your key is able to respond to a challenge that the car is repeatedly transmitting. So what's happening is the car is repeatedly sending out a message saying, is there a valid key there? Is a valid key there? So it's kind of sending out this challenge. Normally no one is responding to it, but once you are near the vicinity of the car, then your key responds to that challenge, and then when after it passes the underlying test, then it just opens. So in this case, these are passive systems. There's nothing, the user needs to do nothing really, right? Just walk near the car and you are kind of good to go. So no button press, nothing. So the way these things work is they kind of engage in this kind of a protocol, and there are several such things which go on, but kind of I've shown this thing, but the basic idea is it kind of responds to this thing. The problem out here is that if not done right, these things are vulnerable to a relay attack. And essentially what happens in a relay attack is the following, that the attacker and whatever pair of attackers, hoods. One person is near the car, other person is near the owner who is happily in his office. And essentially, and remember, now to open the car, no key needs to be pressed, right? I mean, so I cannot have the owner unless, like maybe in some cases the key is not maybe you press it, but generally that's not an option. So in this case, no key, except what's happening is this guy, he has a relay, he picks up the signal, transmits it out here, which he transmits. So now the key thinks it's near the car, so the key will respond to the challenge. You send it out here, and then returns to the car, and voila, the car opens. Okay. So now in this case, remember again, I have to break nothing. No crypto needs to be broken, right? I mean, the key messages are remain encrypted. I don't need to know the key. All I'm doing is this. So how would you protect against that? Any thoughts?
I was going to say you can verify that the key inside the car, but you could say that maybe
No, the car is locked, so I can't sit inside. So it could, if key is inside the car, although usually that will not work because I want as I approach the car, I want the car door to open. But you're kind of on the right track.
You can set a maximum time for response. That is, this relay virus channel, it has time to transmit the signal from
Yeah, so absolutely. So both of you, essentially, we have to verify the key is near the car, right? I mean, that's really what you have to do, and that's super challenging. Okay, the reason it's super challenging is, now how do we normally verify that? A nice scheme is look at the signal strength. Okay, doesn't work because guess what? While normally when you need it, the signal may not travel, but signals often do travel pretty long distances. Okay, like for example, my office is on the 6th floor out here, and I usually park the car on the lot 9, and yeah, I mean, I think under some circumstances the signal can go through. Okay, so it's not entirely out of the realm. People have shown that even RFID signals can travel 30 to 100 feet under various circumstances. So you can't rely on like saying it won't travel. So signal strength based things don't work. So to get accurate distance, you need to really rely on time of flight. The problem then begins to happen is that you also want to make sure that you just cannot lie. That is, my system is fast enough to be able to detect the typical difference of the distance right? So now remember, you're dealing with the speed of light and these kind of issues, right? I mean, the time periods we're dealing with are incredibly short. So it's been a great area of research, actually. I mean, the person who has done the most work, this Civil Chaplain, he used to be my postdoc, so he has made his whole career around this, and his company last fall got bought by, like, I mean, these guys are now supplying to Volkswagen and Mercedes, and they are the solution provider at this point. They use ultra wideband radios behind this, and they have figured out. So I'll go into kind of the secure localization and ranging a little bit later, but essentially that's the modern solution behind this. Okay, then the final class of attack vectors is really hacking directly the ECUs in the car. ECUs are the computers inside the car. They are basically embedded processors and a network of them, and these cars have hundreds of these ECUs, like some of the higher end cars do, and most, like the one of the ECU, for example, in a typical gasoline power car is the engine control module. This controls the timings of the valves and stuff like that, but then there are ECUs for brakes and ECUs for navigation unit and all sort of stuff. Even like if you have a camera which is monitoring the road, then the image will go over a network to the ECU where the decision is being made. So it's basically a distributed system, and the network connecting them used to even now in most of the cars is based around something called a CAN bus, which is control area network, but in some of the newer cars they have begun to use gigabit second type special networks, Ethernet inspired, but basically that's the situation. Now these ECU firmwares need to be updated, right? I mean sometimes bugs are found or features update need to be done and stuff like that, and sometimes pretty deeply. I mean Tesla in particular, as you know, periodically kind of sends out updates, and some of their updates really are firmware level updates inside the ECU level, not just some high level superficial updates. So these are intrinsically designed to be updatable, and any law and act process, that is, if an unauthorized firmware can be put into the ECU, then you can have all sort of fun there. Now in a typical car, the CAN bus thing is brought out on a port, which is typically when you sit on a car somewhere on under the steering wheel left, it's kind of a looks like a gigantic serial port connector, and you can buy stuff on Amazon to hook up to it and all, and you can again, no one thought that people were going through it, so these ECU firmware updates were basically unprotected, so you can update the firmware. This is how like you do even things like if your engine status light came on and you're trying to sell your car, you can use the app on your phone connected to this thing to reset it and all, right? I mean you can do kind of stuff that a car mechanic can do, or even kind of see like when you take the car for a smoke test, again they hook up to that port. Okay, so essentially that's the portal to kind of the innards of your car. But these bus protocols and all were not really designed to be protected. They can easily be snooped by connecting, and then you can at your leisure kind of decipher them. So this whole CAN bus is well understood. Lots of microcontrollers support them, so you can easily buy the hardware around it. You can talk to your car network and all, and what that has resulted in is the usual things. I can send spoof messages, so I can, if imagine I had access to your car, maybe I'm in a valet and I had access to your car, maybe I surreptitiously put that device. Most people don't even know that that port exists, and now this thing can send out messages to the braking system or to the engine control module and whatnot. So rogue ECUs, okay, replay attacks. So we capture these information and then at a different time we know. Fuzzing. So fuzzing in security refers to the fact that we try to find bugs, weaknesses in a system which will cause a crash, or worse yet, which will let us break the system by bombarding it with random data. Okay, idea is you keep sending it random messages and all until something bad happens, and then you know the weakness. So this is your probing. Okay, you can disable the engine. You can disable the engine at a certain location or at a certain speed, and those kind of you can do. CAN bus is a priority-based system, so certain messages which are delay sensitive get higher priority in this. You can mess with that and cause problems with the control systems in the car. And then you can inject malware and do all sort of funky stuff. Even surprise notifications and all on the navigation entertainment unit and all can cause can cause problems. So you can buy these things. This is the so-called OBD2 port, as it is called. That's a little yellow arrow, and then you can buy these kind of devices and do a lot of cool stuff. Okay, and on Alibaba Express and eBay and all, you can buy these things very, very cheaply, and you can mount large-scale attacks if you want, right? I mean, coordinated attacks across multiple vehicles. I'm going to stop out here and pick this thing up on Thursday.